Hello everybody. Today we're going to be talking about the Anglo-Saxons, and the two books that I'm going to be referencing are The Adventures of English by Melvin Bragg and The Anglo-Saxon Age by John Blair. The original inhabitants of the British Isles are largely unknown to us historically. Now, around 600 BC, or about 2,600 years ago, the Celtic people come from Central Europe and they come into Britain. About 100 AD, the Romans conquer Britain, and it becomes Britannia. And that's where we get the word Britain from. It comes from the Roman province of Britannia. Now, Roman Britain is the origin of a lot of the modern cities of England today. So you can see on the map here in Roman Britannia, we have London, Colchester, Lincoln, and York. Those are very important cities today, and they were important Roman centers then. After the Roman Empire collapses, we have a power vacuum. So in 410 AD, Alaric the Visigoth knocks on the gates of Rome and says, "I'm here." And people in Rome say, "Why do we have legions way up there in Britain when we can't even protect our home? We can't even protect Rome." So the legions are removed from Britain, and now these Germanic tribes, like the Franks and the Saxons and the Frisians and the Angles and the Jutes, have all this open territory. The legions have left. And you can see here the Angles and Saxons in red are going to come across the English Channel, and they are going to invade Celtic Britain. And where do the Saxons come from? Originally, the Saxons, you can see in yellow here, the Saxons come from Central and Eastern Germany, and they are going to be the ones, the Angles and the Saxons, and then the Jutes up there in Denmark, they are going to be the ones that come to Britain and conquer it after the Romans have left. And this is why Britain becomes part of the southern half of Britain, the island of Britain becomes England, because it's the Angle land. The Angles and the Saxons come from Germany, and they conquer southern Britain, and so it is now Angle land. And they are speaking Old English. So the origins of the languages I'm using right now are in Germany, and these people came to Britain. Have an important story today from this time period. The Arthurian legends develop, and Arthur is Welsh for bear, and Arthur is a Welshman who is holding back the Anglo-Saxon tide, and as the story goes, for a time he's able to hold back the Anglo-Saxons, but then the Welsh and the Celtic people are eventually driven from their ancestral lands by the Anglo-Saxons. Guinevere is Welsh for fair. Here's a map of Britain from around the year 600 AD, and you can see in black the territories that are ruled by the Anglo-Saxons, and some of them are East Anglia, Lindsey, and then Essex and Wessex and Sussex. And a note about some of these names: Essex is East Saxony. That's where Essex comes from. Wessex is West Saxony, and Sussex is South Saxony. And these come from the Saxons that conquered these areas from the Celts. And you can see, of course, there's Anglia. Those are where the Angles were. Now in white, you can see places that were held by the Celts. And it's important to know that far north in Britain, which is Scotland, was held off by the Celts. The Anglo-Saxons didn't conquer it. And then in western Britain, you have what is Wales today. And those are the Celtic parts of Britain that remain today.
King Offa of Mercia, who was the king of the English in the latter 700s, he is a critical figure because he's often considered to be the first powerful English king. And it's during his reign that the Anglo-Saxon world is now entering the world of established kingdoms, and they are in communication with Charlemagne of the Holy Roman Empire. And so the English are now on the world stage, and it's under Offa's rule that large building projects and land grants and charters are developed.
Here you can see some of the centers in early Britain. There's Wessex, Mercia, and Anglia in the south, and then to the far north in white is Northumbria. And Northumbria will be very important in the development of the culture in Britain and in England, and actually in the rest of the continent of Europe.
One of the fascinating things about the history of England is that Christianity came to the Anglo-Saxons from the north. It came through Irish monks. There's a great book about this. It's called How the Irish Saved Civilization by Cahill. It's a very good book. And it talks about how the Irish monks started to colonize the northern part of Britain. And the most famous monastery that was founded was Lindisfarne in Northumbria. And that was a very important cultural center. And from Northumbria, Irish monks start to go south, and they begin to bring Christianity to the English. So the English received Christianity from the Celts, and that's a really important thing to know. By 650, Christianity is pretty much established among the Anglo-Saxons. So within 150 years, or within 2 centuries of the first Anglo-Saxon ventures into Britain, they are now adopting Christianity. Now it's time for the Anglo-Saxons to be attacked. And in 793, the great monastery of Lindisfarne in Northumbria, one of the great cultural centers of early Middle Ages, is sacked and destroyed by the Vikings. And after 793, the Viking Age really goes into full swing. All throughout the 800s, the island of Britain is under almost constant attack by Danish and Norwegian Vikings. And different parts of the island are conquered by the Danes and the Norwegians. In 867, the Danes capture the major city of York in England, and it appears that the Vikings are going to conquer England. And a major invasion is prepared for the kingdom of Wessex. The Danes are going to invade Wessex and basically vanquish the Anglo-Saxons from Britain. And then in 871, we have the rise of Alfred the Great. And even in really academic and stuffy texts, Alfred the Great is often considered the man who saved England. He's considered by many to be the greatest English king of all time. Alfred the Great is an example of people who actually stood up to the Vikings and fought back. And from this point on, the English are now ascending. They've been attacked on all sides, they're outnumbered, and they're going to fight back, and they're going to push out the Danes.
So we can see in 871, the Danes have taken over eastern England, and the Norse have taken over much of western England in red. And there's Wessex and Mercia. The Danes are preparing to vanquish the Anglo-Saxons from the island. They're going to attack Wessex. However, Alfred the Great fights back, and you'll see in successive years how he and his successors fight off the Vikings and save England. So we can see the Anglo-Saxons pushing back the Vikings.
Beowulf is the oldest work in English that still survives to today. And Beowulf is a great work if you've never read it. It is about, basically, Beowulf is a monster destroyer. And you have Grendel, who's sort of like this giant troll that goes around to these beer halls and busts the door open. And then Beowulf is the savior of his people, and he fights off the monsters. But it's a fascinating story. It's in Old English. And Old English is different enough from modern English, or you have to study Old English to be able to read it. If you do get the chance to read Beowulf, you may notice that it seems a lot like The Lord of the Rings, or it has a lot of elements in it that are like The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. And the truth is that J.R.R. Tolkien was in fact a scholar of Anglo-Saxon. He could read Old English, and he knew all of the Germanic tales, and so a lot of Lord of the Rings comes right out of this time period. So Old English is really fascinating. Some examples of some Old English words that we have today are shire, which means county, and a reeve, which is an administrator. So some people have the last name Reeve, and if you take shire and reeve and you put them together, you get shire reeve or sheriff. So the sheriff is the shire reeve. Another great word from Old English is lord. So like a landlord. A lord is a loaf, like a loaf of bread, plus the word warden. The loaf warden, and those just sort of come smashed together, and you get lord from loaf ward, loaf warden. So the lord is the one who controls the loaves of bread. Some other words from Old English include our days of the week. So Thursday is Thor's day, the thunder god. Thor's day is Thursday. Friday is Freya's day. Freya was a Germanic goddess. Another watershed year in the history of the Anglo-Saxons is 1066. This is when William the Conqueror and the French-speaking Normans come from France. It's the opposite of D-Day. In D-Day, the Allies went from Britain to France. Now it's the opposite in 1066. French-speaking Normans go from northern France, from Normandy, go across the English Channel into South England and conquer England. And for centuries, the language of the ruling class is French. And so if you've ever seen the movie Braveheart, the bad guy in Braveheart, King Longshanks, in real life, he and other ruling kings of that period in the later Middle Ages, they spoke French. His first language would have been French. It wasn't until 1399 when King Henry summons Parliament, he uses English, and it's the first time that English is used as an administrative language in England since the Battle of Hastings. So over 300 years had passed between William the Conqueror in 1066 and King Henry in 1399 calling Parliament in England in English. That English, after 300 years, re-emerges as the dominant ruling language in England. So the English language, like the Anglo-Saxon people, endured all these struggles. They were attacked from all sides, and they did, in fact, maintain. English survived. The Anglo-Saxons survived.